Hello, bonjour, and ahoy. I'm Roger Hilton, Defense and Security Research Fellow at GLOBSEC, coming to you live from the 2021 GLOBSEC Bratislava Forum. It's day one, and it's my pleasure in the future for the next 3 days to be bringing you video highlights, recaps, and all of the major updates from our international conference. We have a rock star lineup of speakers and moderators, and we really hope you look forward to watching us in the future. We started bright and early with our annual European Defense Roundtable and launched GLOBSEC's Future Security and Defense Council. Following the official welcome presented by our Masters of Ceremony, we heard a keynote from Slovakian President Zuzana Čaputová on Building Back Better. We were then privileged to hear a video message from His Holiness, Pope Francis, who spoke to our world audience on the merits of hard work and compassion. Staying in Central and Eastern Europe, both the President of Poland and Croatia delivered keynotes and stressed the need for global solidarity in times of crisis. Shifting to a topic of the future, an energetic debate on the state of the future of transatlantic relations in the digital sphere took place. While on our second stage, the global perspectives on how to fight COVID and emerge from the pandemic stronger also happened. Finally, to wrap up the day, the Prime Ministers of Austria and Slovakia, as well as the Deputy Prime Minister of Czechia, discussed the European Recovery Plan and how to jumpstart the continental economy. For more information on our other world-class panels, make sure to check our website and our various social media channels on Facebook and Instagram. See you on day 2.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here today. It's very exciting to attend a live event finally after being locked up for so long. We have a very exciting panel here this morning for you about a subject that I think is close to all of our hearts, the great EU soul searching. It's obviously something that we've been talking about for a very long time, and I suspect will be for many years to come. But let me introduce the panel quickly. We have some of the greatest experts on this subject in Europe here today, both in the room here as well as virtually. Let me start along with the appropriate protocol with our host, Foreign Minister Ivan Kwarčok. Thank you very much for being with us here today, sir. We also have Alexander Schallenberg, who of course is the Austrian Foreign Minister. We have piped in from Rome, Marina Sereni, who is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Italy. And finally, we have Daniela Schwarzer, who many of you, I suspect, know from some of her previous jobs. She's in a new position now as Executive Director for Europe and Asia for the Open Society Foundation. And she is, as I am, based in Berlin. My name is Matthew Karnichnik. I'm Politico's Chief Europe Correspondent, and I have the pleasure of moderating the discussion today. I should mention that if you are interested in diving somewhat deeper into this material, the GLOBSEC Policy Institute has published a paper called The Time for the EU's Foreign Policy is Now, which you can collect outside, I believe. I would also like to remind you that you can ask questions. There's the GLOBSEC app at your disposal, and I look forward to a lot of provocative questions from the audience over the next hour. Let me just remind you that the session is only 60 minutes long, so please keep your questions brief, and I would ask the people in the room here to stand up. So with no further ado, let's begin, and I would like to start with you, Minister Schallenberg, if I could. You come from a country that is famous for being neutral. Some would say maybe too neutral on some subjects. When you are looking at this issue of the role that the EU should play on the global stage. I mean, especially today when we think about the summit meeting that is going to take place in Geneva in a few hours. It's notable that the EU isn't going to be at that table. Should the EU have more of a role here? Will it ever be at the big boys table, as some people call it?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here, and it's really awesome, I have to say, to see so many people in 3D physically. It makes a difference, and it's a good sign that we are slowly getting out of this situation we had in the last 12 months. Well, thank you for the question, because it's funny. I have heard already the contrary, that Austria is not neutral enough lately. From our perspective, in the last 25 years after joining the European Union, neutrality was never an issue. And I believe this is not the issue on the European level. And yes, we should claim our seat in the table of the big players. And we actually we're already sitting there. If we do the soul searching in Europe, we are extremely good at talking ourselves down sometimes. We have this tendency of seeing the deficiencies and not looking at the things that are actually working. It's the same thing on common market and other European issues. We don't see the 80% working. We only stare at the 20%, which might be difficult. And we are still the biggest worldwide donor of foreign aid. We are an economic bloc. We are a financial bloc. We are a trade bloc. We have leverage. The only thing is we have to start using it. I believe the key word, the buzzword we should be using is less strategic autonomy, but coherence, capability to act and to put our pieces together. Because we have it, and I believe Ivan and I, we have it constantly in the Council, that we talk about issues and then we say, why don't we use our trade power? Why don't we are the biggest donor in a certain area. We are the biggest trade power in a certain area, but we are not capable of putting that, spilling it over, bringing it over to use it as a political means. And this is something which is a hard lesson for Europe to learn. I believe the thing is, sometimes I compare it, if I can take a step back. After the fall of the Iron Curtain, we had this impression, everything, the whole world will become more European. Russia is moving towards us. Turkey is trying to take over European standards. Then we had a phase of hangover. We woke up and we found out, no, the world is not nice. The world is not moving and becoming towards the European Union, is not becoming more European. And the winds are getting rougher for us. And now we are in this phase of waking up, of getting sober again and being more realistic. And it's a steep, sometimes painful learning curve, but we're doing it. Consider, for instance, the FDI screening we have established in 2018-19 foreign direct investments, or simply the wordings. I mean, that we consider in EU documents China as not only a partner and a competitor, but also as a systemic rival, is something we would have never done 6 to 7 years ago. So things are progressing. We're not there yet, but things are progressing.
Follow up on that quickly, because you mentioned China. There was also an attempt over the past several weeks to have a joint EU statement on China, criticizing China for the human rights abuses there. That has been blocked by Hungary because we have this system of unanimity within the EU 27. You talk about coherence, and yet it seems that still every country pretty much is pursuing its own foreign policy. Your own country recently, I think you just hinted at the criticism of the neutrality, which also happens to be my country, raised the Israeli flag on the top of both the foreign ministry and the chancellery a few weeks ago, was criticized for that. So how do you create this coherence? Because it doesn't really seem to be there at the moment.
I don't believe that coherence has anything to do with a qualified majority voting. Yes, I regret that we didn't manage to get a common approach and a common vote on Hong Kong. But I've been around for the Treaty of Nice negotiations. I've been part of most IGCs as diplomat in the past 20 years, even the Convention on the Future of Europe. QMV is not the solution for everything. We have to be aware of that. One of the strengths that the European Union has is this internal capacity of speaking with one voice, and this credibility that comes along with it. So in the moment we have QMV, probably third countries it wouldn't be a secret who voted against. So who would tell us that the Chinese or Russians or others would not use this possibility to go to the dissenting opinion and saying, come on, you don't agree, we can do something else. I believe, and here again, it's less about procedural issues. It's about the political will. It's about this, you could say, political culture in the Council. And I hope we have the possibility to talk about it later on, because I believe there are many things we can do. And I believe that the High Representative Josep Borrell is moving into the right direction, mandating ministers to do trips on his behalf and other things. And it's more the political will that we need than structural changes. And that is because coherence is the same thing. If we start overcoming these blockages which we have, even within the Commission, that the DGA doesn't want to know what the DGB is doing, or say, this is my garden, I tend to it alone. And we have the same thing on national level. This is not a criticism. This is a coherence is a challenge for every administration. And I believe if we get better at it, the stronger we will be internationally.
Ivan Korchok, your country is also one of the smaller members of the EU, is not known to be a big fan of
We always
UMP.
say mid-sized countries.
How do you achieve this goal of coherence, in your view, that Minister Schallenberg just raised?
I wish I knew. But funny thing is that with my friend Alexander Schallenberg, by the way, who has a substantial contribution to the fact that I'm foreign minister, because he offered me a repatriation flight, the last one from Washington, by which I managed to get home to be sworn in as a foreign minister. So
I got so many calls from Slovakia.
Since then, yes, not to do it. So from day one, we really became a very, very good colleagues. But I'm mentioning that as well, because when entering the room and Mr. Karničík, I encouraged him to start with Alexander, and he said, well, it's difficult because always I speak after you, he said. And he always said, I agree with me. And this time I want to make it a bit more provocative because I am speaking after you, and I do not agree that much with what you said, because it's right that we as a European Union have capacities, that we have ambition, no doubt about it, to play a global role. Nevertheless, when you look at the output, I think it's not what it should be. I believe I'm inspired by yesterday's contribution of our president, Zuzana Čaputová, what she said in her contribution, and partly by the Pope Francis, who said that in a way that any soul searching, this is the title of the panel, start with recognizing reality in which we are living. And I have here 4 points which I believe are worth recalling all the time, in order to realize in what kind of world we are living in what kind of world the EU claims its ambition to become a global player. What is underway is geopolitical shift from Euro-Atlantic to Indo-Pacific region, and that's not a theory. That's happening as we speak right now. Second, our model of governance is getting more and more under pressure, and I think John Allen, who was awarded yesterday, spoke eloquently about that. Liberal democracy gets under pressure. It's being questioned. It's being questioned not by our opponents. It's very often questioned by ourselves. Number three, the power struggle continues to move from traditional domain to competition in the area of technology. And the question is whether we can basically live up to that challenge and omnipresent issue of demography. So I think President Čaputová was right when she said we need a joint perception of this to see this reality and to set the ambition right for us, for European Union, to be a global player. That brings me to my second point, and that contradicts a little bit the doses of optimism which my friend brought today from Vienna. Friends, the longer I'm in this business, the more I'm asking myself whether we've set it right, our ambition to be a global player, a European Union. I'm not giving up that ambition, but I'm asking. Don't forget, the EU was created more than, 70 years ago, in order to basically not to project our interest externally beyond our borders, but rather to curb power within or amongst the member states. That was the original idea, the DNA on which the EU was built, to prevent countries, waging war amongst ourselves. But in the 60s and later on the 70s, there was not a single idea that we would be expected to exert and show power and project power externally. And all of a sudden, because the world has changed so much dramatically, of course there is no other way but to claim it. But if you look at the respective areas which influence the global developments, where are we? He's right, my friend Alexander, with the development policy and so on, development assistance. That's right, but shouldn't we, instead of reclaiming the global ambition, start somehow rethinking the level of ambition that we want to project? And that brings me to the third point. I'm not a friend of grand strategies because, every morning then you are waking up and you are confronted that while we have global ambition, while we have grand strategy, but you have Lukashenko.
Right.
And he exposes us to our level of influence, where we basically see not only European Union, but other countries as well.
Well, speaking about the countries, I'd like to bring in Deputy Minister Marini quickly.
So, but maybe the last point, just to round it up, I'm rather friend of sub-strategies, a smaller, clearly defined strategies vis-a-vis, or in those areas where we must deliver. It's the Western Balkans, definitely. In the Middle East, where are we there as European Union? Where are we as a European Union when it comes to solution of a conflict in Ukraine? Where are we in the north of Africa? So rather more down-to-earth approach in order not to be disappointed each and every time when we claim global influence, but the output is suboptimal, I would say.
Thank you very much, sir. Marina Sereni, I'd like to bring you into the discussion. Ivan Korchok raises an interesting point that the EU, as it has evolved, is at a point now where it might be aiming too high, and maybe it should stick to its knitting a little bit more and focus on places in the world that it can change, be it the Western Balkans or looking at Belarus and other places. You represent one of the larger members of the EU. Do you think from Rome, when you look out at Europe, that the European Union needs to be playing a more forceful role here? Or do you think that the system can continue to kind of muddle along as it is now?
Thank you very much for the question. And let me start thanking Mr. Korchok, Minister Korchok, for his kind invitation. I'm really glad to be able to participate in the Bratislava Forum, and I have the chance of analyzing with you a theme of central relevance for our common future. The EU wants to be a global player, or in the expression used by both the President of the Commission and by the High Representative, a geopolitical actor. This is a huge challenge, and in my opinion, it is also a necessity. It is quite clear that no single EU member state can have a real impact on major international issues, while a European Union with a united position certainly will stand better chances. The common foreign and security policy has the ambition to be the common foreign policy of 27 member states. Currently, however, it is often only the minimum common denominator of the 27 member states' foreign policies. This is the price we have to pay to have a common foreign policy reconciling national interests of 27 member states. These interests could diverge one from the other, and sometimes they could as well be in conflict one with the other. I am convinced that the EU should show in words and in deeds its capacity to act as a geopolitical actor, especially in case of crisis, like those mentioned by Minister Korchok, especially in our own neighborhood. I'm thinking as an example to the Mediterranean and Middle East area, and specifically to the Middle East peace process. Recent events made it clear that this subject cannot be put aside, but needs to be faced and solved if we want peace and security for the region and indirectly for Europe. The European Union can play a significant role within the Quarter and in contact with the parties, but it needs to show a coherent position, in other words, to speak with a single voice or with various voices if you want, but saying the same things. We are not there for the moment, and we are losing, or we risk to lose ground to other actors, and we have to know this in the current situation in order to make sure that the EU acts collectively in foreign policy. It is important to make an effort to ensure the maximum convergence among member states. We should strive to have a common foreign and security policy, at the same time effective and representative of the whole membership. There are indeed new tools, I would like to mention them, through which the EU aims at improving its capacity to act in foreign and security policy. I'm thinking, for instance, at the new financial instrument for external action, DCI, who has been renominated Global Europe, which should provide the EU geopolitical effort with a new operational architecture, able to better pursue its political priorities, including the promotion of democracy, the rule of law and human rights, security, migration and mobility, trade and inclusive and sustainable growth. INDICI will also prove instrumental in helping us solving another of our problems. That is the need to increase EU visibility and projection capacity while countering a negative narrative on our action abroad. Equally, I would like to mention the strategic compass that EU is bringing together. The EU is bringing together in a coherent way all its security and defense tools. It is true, Minister Korczok said before, we should not think always in a strategic way for having a strategy, but we need also some places where we can think strategically, and we need to have these instruments. We need to have the possibility to provide the EU with the ability to act autonomously when necessary, but together with others whenever possible. And the debate
there, Minister, just for a moment.
We had in these days with the United States, and we are with our principal allies, is very clear and very important for us.
Thank you very much. And I do think that you raise an interesting point, Danielle Schwarze, when Deputy Minister Sereni talks about the lowest common denominator, and the implication there is that there is a lowest common denominator. And in my view, there doesn't even seem to be a lowest common denominator. There is no denominator often. If you look at policy towards places like Russia or China recently, the Middle East, you know, is this really a realistic way forward, or should the EU just acknowledge that it doesn't have a common foreign policy and won't until it gets away with QMV, and maybe just concentrate on other things?
Well, thanks for that encouraging question, Michael. I wouldn't agree with you. There is a common denominator. And if we just take the list that Ivan Korczok gave us of the challenges we are facing, I think if you start from there and you ask any European government whether the EU should be able to at least protect itself, if not impact on global developments that really go to the core of our national systems, because the challenges that have been named, they are not out there, they are within the European Union, they are within member states. If you just take the topic of Chinese or Russian interference within Western liberal democracies. So I would say there is a common denominator. However, when we then look at the question, do the member states share the answers to handle some of the crises, and you mentioned the Middle East. We haven't talked about Africa yet. I would put that into the picture as well. Russia, of course. I think what we definitely need to work on in the European Union is a very precise risk and threat assessment. And of course, the attention of a country, for instance, like France, goes towards Africa, goes towards the risk of terrorism. While if you go to Poland and you ask them, what is your risk assessment? It is the physical threat of Russia. And it is the sense of undermining democracy within the European Union by hybrid threats. And so this is what the EU has to work on, and it has started. And this is what I find encouraging. And the Deputy Italian Foreign Minister just said the strategic compass is an important tool forward. And I think it is true. What is this? Basically, the 27 member states compare notes on what they see out there as the most important threats and challenges. And the conversation that is now ongoing, and I suppose the ministers will be able to evaluate whether there is in fact progress on the council level. There is an effort to build a common understanding. And once we have that, we can be far more serious on the question of, do we have the instruments? And the term strategic autonomy is very often mentioned. I don't think we should discuss that kind of abstract concept, because Europeans don't project the same notions into that. What we need is a very serious understanding. What capacity to act do we have and do we need? And if we look at that picture, it's grim, because we do not have the tools at our disposal. Let me just comment on why I think this is so. Obviously, the member states never transferred foreign or defense policy to the European level. So you cannot blame the EU that it doesn't deliver on that. You have to look at the member states and you have to ask them, are you serious that individually you will be able to tackle those challenges out there? Is the right framework NATO, or do Europeans need to work more closely together? And I do think if we take the impact of the COVID-19 crisis and the deep pressure on national budgets, there's an even stronger case now to enhance European cooperation on defense within the NATO framework. Let me pick one other example where it is really a lack of political will to build the right instruments. We all know we live in a geo-economic world now where it's not only about foreign and defense policy. If we think about external relations and impacting regional or global developments, it's very much about the strategic use of economic tools as well, and others turn them against us. Now, we have the single market as a huge asset. We have the euro as a huge asset. But when we ask ourselves, is the euro punching above or below its weight internationally? The answer is clearly below. And why? Because it doesn't have the standing of an international currency. Now, I'll close with that. When Donald Trump decided to leave the JCPOA, so the Iran agreement, we suddenly had this discussion in Berlin. I was sort of part of it at the core. So what can we do? What alternatives do we have to counter the extraterritorial sanctions that the US imposed at the time? And the quick answer was, well, we have to use the euro. We need a stronger role for the euro. And then when it came to the discussion, why is the euro not where it should be? The simple answer is because the member governments never went as far as they should have to internally consolidate the monetary union by giving it a deep financial market, by giving it the financial tools it needs, by completing banking union, and by seriously working on legitimate governance mechanisms. So, we can criticize the lack of global power of the EU, but in order to work on it, we have to look at the internal conditions within the European Union, and that's where the responsibility of national governments is.
Thank you very much. I think we've had 4 very interesting opening statements here. I'd like to pick up the pace a little bit with your questions. We do have a few questions already. One to the heart of what you were just saying, Daniela, which is the question of the EU's defense capability, and if that needs to be built out really before something substantial can happen in terms of EU power. Ivan Korchok, your country is a member of NATO. How do you see this question? I mean, do we need to get to a point where there really is a substantial EU military force in some in some constellation for the EU to exercise its power, in addition to the economic tools through the euro and other measures?
NATO is in a good shape. I think it's fair to say, and this is my conclusion from the meeting which I had a chance to attend 2 days ago. I have a good feeling from that. It's a recommitment to the very basic role of NATO, which is collective defense. We have an agreement that we have embarked upon a journey where we want to make it fit for the 2030 challenges. America is back. President Biden was very clear and outspoken on that. So NATO is, I think, in a good shape. In addition, this is not very popular, but over the last 4 years, the member states of NATO have increased the defense spending by 200 billion. 200 billion more are we spending as a NATO nations for our own defense. Now, the eternal question about defense and that ambition of European Union in that area, PESCO, fine. Ambition, fine. But the capability issue, I think we are lagging behind the ambition again. But still, when it comes to what we can project here in this area, it's a question of political will, whether we are able to go into common operations in our vicinity. I'm very much curious what the European Union will show in Africa, in Sahel region. So this is extremely important if we really want to live up to what we proclaim our global ambition and more influence in the area of foreign policy.
Let me go to Mr. Scharrenberg quickly, because you have an interesting perspective, I think, coming from, again, a neutral country.
No,
I think it might be good that you're not in NATO, actually, because the Austrian Bundesheer, I think, spends less than 2%.
I don't believe it's anything to do with being non-aligned and neutral. The 2 points. One is, and you said there's something very important, is the risk assessment. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a little bit old school to think now we need a European army and this would be the safety we have in the future. If you take the risk assessments nowadays, it's about things like new technologies, artificial intelligence, and these things. So, or quantum mechanics. If we don't get our act together on that, it's no use to have an army, frankly. So I believe we need a risk assessment, because otherwise we do what we are great in Europe. We make a grand statement, we have great speeches, we make one step, but without taking the second step, and we have something where we can have an opening ceremony and nothing follows. I believe on defense policy, something, and this has nothing to do with neutrality. Again, we never had an issue with that, and we said so when we joined. And we have 5 member states being non-aligned. It's not only Austria, it's Ireland, Malta, Sweden, and Finland. So what about pooling and sharing? Why don't we have a common market in the defense area? We have tried, and it didn't fail because of the 5 countries which are non-aligned. It failed because of those countries who have a defense industry, and we're under pressure from the local national defense industry, definitely not to buy with the neighbor, to buy the national product. So why don't we start with that, what we're good at, creating the rules, applying the rules of the common market in this area? That would be a first step, and then we can take the second one. So instead of having, again, a grand design and only doing it halfway, as we did in other areas like Schengen, for instance, we did the first step without taking the second step, or the euro area. So I believe let's make a risk assessment first, see where we need to put our strengths together, or pool our forces, and I believe that we might end up saying it's not, the hardware and the army stuff.
Thank you very much. I would like to go to the questions in the room, so please prepare your questions, and while you're thinking about them, I'd like to take one of the questions from the GLOBSEC app, which I think is right to the wheelhouse of our panelists up here. It has to do with the Western Balkans, and the question is, to what extent do you feel the EU is making progress in the Western Balkans in terms of advancing the EU's geostrategic objectives. As said previously, if there is a place where the EU could make its weight felt, it would be in the Western Balkans. Maybe start small. I think, Ivan Korchok, you probably have some thoughts on this.
Yes. No, I mean, the Western Balkans, where else if not there? And this is my doctrine, my thinking, if you want. If you want to claim global ambition, you have to start in your neighborhood, in your vicinity. So it's a must. There we have to project our interests because they are indicated that they want to be members one day. Yet at the same time, we see that still in the European Union, national interests are prevailing, and next week, actually, we can show in the Council whether we can finally open or move forward the accession talks with two countries, with Albania and North Macedonia. If not, then we ourselves are putting our enlargement policy, which we believe is the main instrument of projecting stability, in doubt, in question. Everybody sees that there are competing powers which are projecting their interest in the Western Balkans. It's a must for us. But once again, this is where we can basically measure that on the one hand we want to be a player there. On the other hand, when it comes to such a fundamental issues like to reciprocate to the progress that North Macedonia and Albania have done, we are not able to find a consensus because there is one national issue, which I do respect, I want to say. I do respect that Bulgaria has a national interest there. But if you look at it from a broader perspective, it is a big problem for us. And then I'm asking myself, how can we expect that we will be more able on a big chess game when we are not able to have a clear position in the Western Balkans?
I couldn't agree more. We can stop talking about geopolitics. It's not even our neighborhood. It's a European courtyard. It's surrounded by EU member states. It's like our patio, and we don't get the act together in our neighborhood, then we should stop talking about the grand designs in geopolitics. It's as simple as that. Sorry to be very frank. Citizens expect us to be able to project security, and Commissioner Johan once said very rightly, either we are capable of projecting and exporting security and stability, or we'll end up importing instability and insecurity. It's a very simple quotation, and it's astonishing that we fail even in the closest neighborhood. You mentioned Belarus beforehand. We have the Ukraine, we have Moldova, we have Southern Caucasus, we have the the Southern Mediterranean,
and the whole Eastern Partnership.
These are the areas where we have to prove ourselves.
Yeah.
I would like to go to a question in the room. The woman here in the second row, please state your name and your affiliation, please.
Isadora Subillaga. I am a democratic activist from Venezuela, and for the last 2 years I've been the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of the constitutionally elected interim government. I want to first thank Vice Minister Marina Sereni because she has been a great champion for the Venezuelan cause in Italy. But I am actually surprised and sad that I've been here for 2 days and nobody has mentioned the word Latin America. It's like we don't exist. And the EU, we believe and we feel that sometimes have disconnects between Brussels and the member states, disconnects between Brussels and the EU Parliament, who has a more firm and clear view of what happens in Venezuela and Latin America, because what
do you have a question though?
Yes.
Okay.
It's having a spillover effect over the rest of the region. My question to you both in the room and to all of you is, don't take Venezuela geographically or culturally, because what you have experienced and the diagnosis that you have here from the real threat that we have in Latin America is more important because it's based on values. We're defending democracy, and the threat comes from countries like Russia, like China, like Iran, And it seems to me that you can take a greater stand defending these values in a region that it's actually close to Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's try to make the answer briefer than the questions, please. Maybe Deputy Foreign Minister Sereni, would you like to take this question since you seem to have some expertise in Latin America?
Yeah, I want to greet my friend Isabella, and yes, I agree with her. Of course, Europe has to take in account the perception of our security and our main priorities in this moment in the agenda is not Latin America, but at the same time, as we want to be a global player, we cannot forget the Latin America because we have a very strong cultural, economic and political relationships with that region. Particularly, we have to be committed in a crisis situation like that one in Venezuela, because we are facing a huge humanitarian crisis, and we need to show, together with other partners like-minded, like the US, of course, we have to show that we are helping the opposition and the population, not only on the humanitarian side, but also on the political one. And we are following, as EU, the process for the next elections in November. You know that there are some very small pieces of hopes that we can see in the dialogue. We are following the Norwegian activities of mediation, and we are pushing for a real dialogue for all, among the Venezuelans with the guarantee of the international community. We will participate tomorrow to the donors conference about Venezuela, but it is not enough to be there with the humanitarian attitude. We have also to have a political one.
Minister Sereni, I'd like to bring in the other panelists here. Alexander Schallenberg, you had a brief comment, as did Ivan Korczok. We only have 15 minutes left, so I'd like
only
to...
a very brief comment. Don't take it personally. Probably other regions weren't mentioned as well. But you raised a point which I think is extremely important. We haven't mentioned either yet. I believe one of the key issues is for the European foreign policy in the future, it has to be a value-based foreign policy. This is our strength. This is our soft power. And we have to acknowledge only 25% of UN member states are sharing the same model of life. And if we talk about the Western Balkans, for instance, or Venezuela, it's a fight about what kind of model we want to export. And I believe very strongly and personally, the things we fought for, the things we build up, in the last 2.5 centuries, actually, in Europe, are universal, of a universal value, and we should fight for them. So we need a value-based foreign policy. We need to invest in those partnerships that are necessary, like the transatlantic partnership, like the UK. Let's forget about Brexit. Let's move on with UK, because it's a strong partner we need in the future. And on this respect, you may raise an important point, because it doesn't make a difference whether it's in Venezuela, whether it's in Nepal, or whether it's in Southeastern Asia, or in Hong Kong. I believe this is a very strong point, and thank you for opening this possibility.
Just a technical remark. Have you noticed that one of the first decisions that I have made as within the government, for which I was severely criticized here in this country, that we've recognized interim President Guaido, and then more sarcastically I say, I wish we had such a unified position as European Union as we have on Venezuela and in other issues, So I believe it's, of course, we cannot influence entirely the internal developments there, but we've been dealing with Venezuela quite extensively, and the position is very clear towards that.
Very good point, sir. Thank you, Daniela. You wanted to say something briefly?
Yes, I'll be very short, and it adds to what Minister Schallenberg just has said. So credibility starts at home. And I think if that is right what you said, and I deeply buy into that, we should have a values-based foreign policy. We can see how our internal problems of actually protecting those Western liberal values is harming our ability to project soft power. And I guess the Western Balkans are one example where this may play out, because there's competition. There's competition there between two systems. And we need to make sure that we maintain this credibility by ensuring that we do not see further democratic backsliding within the European Union. And the second point of sense of urgency I wish to add is, yes, we have to focus on the regional crisis around the EU and on those countries who are waiting for our leadership to help them transition further, yes. However, we cannot shy away from the very global dimension that was in your question, and that is the systemic competition piece. And yes, we have to rebuild transatlantic relations in that regard, but my concern at the moment is that the EU and a number of member states, and I include my own, Germany, is too slow in actually seizing that momentum that is right now being offered by the United States under new leadership. So if we want to do what you said, I think we have to act on both accounts far more decidedly.
I believe you're completely right, but I have to say one thing, a caution. Yes, we have to remain credible, but we have to see the other side, because we should not fall into the trap to buy in the narrative of other countries who, for instance, tell the Americans, who tell President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken, you don't have nothing to teach us because you have faults in the US as well on human rights. So stop telling us what to do because that's an internal affair. No. So there is still a huge difference and a gap between our standards and the struggle we have internally within the European Union and the fight we are having in other countries and areas of this world. And yes, I 100% agree with you. We have this, and I believe time is of the essence. We have this chance now to really come together, make the North Atlantic, if you want so, more narrow. And we should not mess it up as Europe. America needs us now, and now watching what we're doing. And if we're sending the right signal, and we did already send a couple of wrong signals, then we shouldn't, be astonished if in a couple of years there will be payback time again. And I believe, from my perspective, and we should please stop talking about the transatlantic relationship. Let's talk with Americans about Libya, about the Middle East, about sub-Saharan Africa, about concrete issues where we say, what do we do together? How do we proceed with sanctions? What can we do on a regular level? Instead of talking in like a partnership, how are you doing? What should we do better? Shall we have an excursion together? No, this is not partner therapy. We should act together. And no, sometimes, sorry, I'm very adamant and very emotional on this issue because I believe it's once in a lifetime. And I have this feeling in the Biden administration I've never seen an administration which has so much the wish and the will to work together with us. And here again, neutrality has nothing to do with it. It's values. Sorry to come back to this issue all the time, but it's about values. And my policies, I want my grandchildren to wake up in a society where they have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of media. And our partner in that, the most important partner, are the US. And we have to see this. And I believe in the next 30, 40 years, it will be a really daunting and challenging struggle we will have ahead of us. And I believe it's worth fighting for it.
Thank you very much. I would like to go to another question from the audience. There was a gentleman here in the third row who'd had his hand up for a while. And
Milan Nič, I'm with German Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin, but originally from GLOBSEC in Bratislava. I want to ask about vetoes in EU foreign policy. How can you reconcile it with the EU capacity to act that you mentioned, Daniela? There is increasing nervousness in Berlin with Hungarian vetoes, but what can actually be done about it? What can new federal government in Germany be able to do if you want to change the treaties? And second question to Mr. Schallenberg, if I may, it's really a refreshment to see a more Austrian participation at GLOBSEC, but your chancellor
I wasn't invited before.
I can tell you, as I'm a veteran here, that we always tried. There is a change on the Austrian side, which is welcome.
I wasn't minister.
Milan, there are two Austrians on the panel now, so you can't complain.
Might include it. But it's about values. It's also about how you define your neighborhood and your partners in the EU. And your chancellor yesterday was really brilliant, very eloquent, but he also slipped something. When he referred to Central Europe, then he turned to his colleagues from Czech Republic, Slovakia, and then said Eastern Europe. So how can you reconcile your increased presence, not only at GLOBSEC, but in the region, when you still use the old perceptions and call your partners Eastern Europeans when you travel 60 kilometers down the Danube from Vienna?
Oh, that's a provocative question. I'll let you take that quickly. And then...
Okay. Maybe we start considering ourselves as Eastern Europe. We are east from Prague, actually. No, I talk about Central Europe. And actually, it's funny that we don't have an expression, actually, for the other partners in the European Union. We continue, and that's a very dangerous thing. It's another debate not to be conducted today, is this group perception, the club of 2004 and 7 or whatever the new member states, which is ridiculous because they're not new anymore. And yes, we're investing in heavily in this partnership, because I think the one thing, and the pandemic was not only bad, there were messages in there were lessons we were taught, like the urge of digitalization, of the push in foreign policy. That's another important issue, and I hope that we won't, get it all rid of once the pandemic is fully over. And the other one was neighborhood matters. If you have a fire in your apartment, you don't run to the guy on the other side of the city, you run to the next door neighbor. And that was the thing here. And there's something I believe, sorry, it sounds romantic, beautiful, which has developed, is we had Slavkov, we have Central 5, we have all these formats, and we always have so much to discuss about. So I wouldn't pin it down to words, and for me, it's clearly Central Europe, and we consider ourselves as part of this. This is a wider region starting somewhere in northern Italy and Switzerland, and moving at least until Lemberg, I would say, which is, by the way, closer to Vienna, that's the Ukrainian border, than Vorarlberg. Just to place us geopolitically. But I believe the QMV question, I believe we all could was addressed to you.
Shall I take it?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, Milan, one question is, can we get it? And you mentioned the German government, which makes me slightly smile, because Germany held the EU presidency last year. And at some point, QMV was on the agenda as an idea. And you can blame many things on COVID, but not the fact that this didn't move forward. So what I'm trying to say is you need unanimity to introduce qualified majority votes. And if there's always one or two countries who do not want to go with the EU consensus, there's a very small likelihood that this will actually happen. Right now, I hear the discussion is, and maybe Ivan Korczok can say more on that, to start in some areas of foreign affairs where it is less, let me say, less political, less painful, to be able to create the ability to move forward more quickly, like maybe stabilization policy, crisis support, things like that, humanitarian issues. That would be a big step forward. But for the geostrategic questions that we have been discussing here, if we even had qualified majority vote in the Council of Ministers, I believe the very contentious issues would move up to the European Council, where unanimity again plays. So what I do believe is that the efforts that we have described in trying to frame the issues in a way that Europeans can slowly but surely understand, and not only the top-level political leadership, but really the public debate can understand that we have a common interest to defend and a common shared model that we really work very well with to defend. I think this is the base. And then those more mechanical questions of change of voting rules can then come. And while we have to do that, I think we will see, and I hope we will, member states starting initiatives in smaller groups, but ensuring the backing of at least a vast majority of European governments. And then one final point, which I think was already mentioned, a tool that Josep Borrell wants to employ increasingly is to have special envoys for certain issues and certain regions who can give a voice to the European Union without, of course, at this point, a formal vote, but who can be and show a European presence in areas where the EU is not perceived as a major player. So I think that's what we have to work on for the moment. Of course, I would prefer a system where decisions go through smoothly and are then acceptable to those who are in the minority, but I don't think we are there at the moment. So we have to work with those other means. And again, national governments still have a huge responsibility in that system.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Ivan Korczok, you wanted to make a brief comment on this before we get to the next question. We only have a few minutes left.
QMV, it slowly becomes yet another mantra, the question QMV yes or no, it slowly becomes yet another mantra of which we believe once we resolve it, then we are saved. That will not happen.
Exactly.
My problem is that I spend too much time working within the EU, and I'm asking the audience, because there's so many experts, what do we want to decide on by QMV within the Council, which does not legislate? FSC is not adopting legislation in most cases. There is maybe one area with the sanctions where we legislate, but in other councils, internal market, the entire area of internal market is QMV, but it's legislation. The way how we are trying to project our interests in foreign affairs, it's not through legislation, it's political positions. In other council formations, I don't want to bother you too much with that, there is unanimity as well when adopting political statements. So I would be very cautious, in trying to portray a situation that once we introduce QMV, and I'm asking the audience, QMV on what in foreign policy? On Middle East or other positions?
Marina would like to jump in on
That's going to be much more complicated, and it seems to become a solution to our inability to, have a more impact in foreign policy.
Thank you. Marina Serini, I think you had a comment on this.
Spoil the game.
Yes, very briefly, a short comment, because I agree, qualified majority voting should not be a mantra, but we cannot avoid to have it in our discussion, because we need a decision-making process compatible with modern reaction and communication times. We are not legislating, but if we have to take a position, we have to do it in a normal time with the communication time. And the debate at the EU level about QMV in common foreign policy will be complicated and long. We certainly need to proceed cautiously and with an incremental approach. I agree with Daniela, it's not necessary to have a decision immediately on this, but we have to promote a process since we all know that those in some fields that are particularly sensitive, we need to try to find the way ahead. And I think we cannot avoid this discussion, not decide immediately, but to have a process.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We
just have a couple minutes.
Should we give a green light to starting negotiations with Albania and Macedonia via QMV?
Well, we can ask the audience. I did want to take one more.
But that's impossible at this moment, because it's not a legislative decision.
Minister
it's a political decision.
I think we have somebody who might have some very interesting thoughts on this. One more question to follow Milan's advice and keep it in the Habsburg lands. Karl Schwarzenberg, I believe you had a question and maybe a comment on some of these issues.
Korczuk put an interesting question, if our aims are too high. But I ask myself, considering the European Union, after all, sometimes taking part in foreign policy in the European Union, do we have any aims in European Union? Do we have any clear aims in foreign policy? I didn't recognize them during the whole years I was active in politics. We don't have clear program. Have you, from any commission or from this new invented Office of Foreign Relations, member of the commission, heard clear program? What is our aim in the Middle East? What is our aim towards Russia? What is our aim towards the United States, Latin America, and so on? We have mild interests, softly spoken, nothing more. We don't have any aims. I mean, it's not that I prefer the 19th century, but there was mentioned Venezuela. In the 19th century, one country alone, Britain or France, if there were problems, send
Sir, just
two
briefly,
or
because
three
we're running out of
boats,
time.
and the interests were clearly defined. Nowadays, we have 2 or 3 clear words, and that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I think we have.
But first, Minister Schallenberg, just a quick comment on this.
Very briefly, aim. If you ask Germany, France, what is your aim on Russia? What is your aim? I believe if we go on the meta level, we have an aim, and I believe that's what I tried to say at the very beginning, that we are waking up, we are sobering up, we're becoming less naive in Europe. And as far as I'm considered, the aim is safeguard our values and export them if possible. But we are in a competition as far as our model of life is concerned. And we are realizing that this is a not kind surroundings. We would love to have only friends. And we are figuring out now that we don't. And that we have actually very few trusted valuable friends, and this is, I believe, the aim. What this means then when you put it on Russia, on Belarus, on the Middle East, on Israel, and so on, that's something which might change from year to year, changes to the situation, but I believe that we have a very clear aim as far as values are concerned, I would say. At least I have.
100% agreement. This is what I wanted to say.
Very good.
I mean, no, the question whether we have aims in foreign policy is legitimate, but it's put narrowly, because the overarching aim of European Union is to protect the model of governance, which now gets into competition globally. I think that's the overarching aim. And foreign policy should just contribute to achieving that aim. But that aim is clearly defined. I think it's Article 2, I don't know which one of the treaty, but this is how to protect globally the model of governance which made us prosperous and safe for many, many decades. That's the Slovak interest in the European Union.
That's a very good final word, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of the panelists for an engaging discussion. Thank you to the audience. I'd like to remind you that the next session here in Maria Theresia will be in 5 minutes. So you don't have much time, where we'll be discussing what needs to happen to create an EU that really delivers, following up on this discussion. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.